to share, to subscribe, to comment on this video, and to check out our Patreon, where you can become a supporter of the Cradle so that we can continue to do the work that we do. So today we are a few days removed from the fall of the Arab-Syrian Republic as we've known it for the past several decades. A truly shocking development. It took armed groups led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, UN-designated terrorist organization. It took them 10 days since they launched their offensive before they reached Damascus. I keep bringing this up whenever possible because it's just shocking to me that it took the Taliban 3 months to take Afghanistan from the US-trained Afghan army in 2021. HTS did it in 10 days in an unprecedented situation that saw the Syrian army continuously retreat to, saying this was for strategic reasons, to avoid civilian casualties. The fog of war is still very much present. We are not going to really know possibly the reality of what was happening on the ground for a few more days, although we have heard from Syrian soldiers who have been speaking to Arabic media that they were given orders to not attack, to disengage, and to essentially keep falling back until the exit of President Bashar al-Assad, who now is in Moscow. The former deputy head of ISIS founder, of the founder of ISIS, and the former deputy head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, Abu Mohammed al-Jalani, is now the de facto ruler of Syria, is now a kingmaker. He's having his full Zelensky moment with the media. So what do we make of this? Well, what are you guys' thoughts? Because last week, we had a very a long discussion about what's happening in Syria, and we kept talking about the counteroffensive that the Syrian army will launch, and well, it never really materialized. So with that being said, how do we follow up from this?
I think I'll jump in because I completely got it wrong in the last podcast episode. So I first of all, Esteban, you said, we're a few days away from this massive transformation. Actually, it was just yesterday, which just goes to show how much happened yesterday in the last 24 hours that it feels like, it's been a few days. A couple of days ago, I had a phone call with someone in the know, not a Syrian, who said some things that shocked me. Now, my calculations were all based on the unity of France, axis of resistances, declarations, moving forward as an axis since 2021, and then showing us that unity of France in after October 7th, 2023. And I couldn't have been more wrong. So based on this phone call, which I think things we all know, but I haven't really seen in the mainstream media, so it bears repeating, I think. I was told that they're waiting for a decision from Assad. So I said, what decision? Whether he'll stay or go. And I mean, that floored me. This is like when we were talking about counteroffensive still,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I said, what are you talking about? And I was told that Assad had not requested military support from his allies. Zero. Not from Iran, not from his, nobody. And that in fact, there was a lot of talk about like army commanders ditching their posts, etc. But we did see some fierce fighting from the Syrian army in certain areas and even regaining territory very quickly. So, presumably could have been done if the army was out there in full force. But here's what surprised me. I was told Assad has not deployed his army. Okay, which goes back to what you said in your introduction, that Arabic media talking to the Syrian SAA soldiers, who said that we were not given orders to fight,
To engage,
to engage. So here it was, Assad sitting on the Syrian Arab army, not asking his traditional allies who helped him reverse a Takfiri trend that was so much bigger and such a bigger scale with so much more money, so much more weapons, where these Takfiris had their back covered with Iraq, right? Because they were in Iraq too. So they had free flow across borders. If things got tough in one country, they had a place to retreat to. None of those conditions were true today, and yet Assad decided just to leave. And this is really quite a shocking revelation. Now, of course, the media narrative of the winning side will spin this as the Syrian army just let him down. If you don't have your army, you don't stand a chance. You can't fight, right?
Sure.
But that's not why he stepped down. He actually, from the beginning of the onslaught, was contemplating his future and whether he wanted to stay and fight. And of course, we will hear more about this, that Assad had the Gulf countries, the Saudis, the Emiratis, etc., had Assad's ear more and more over his allies because he wanted to be brought back into the Arab fold. He believed their promises, he believed their economic promises, etc. These are all things, it doesn't really matter. It is what it is today. But I think there's going to be, certainly I've seen a lot of supporters of the former Syrian president just absolutely disgusted by the fact that he left without saying anything, without even
saying a word, yeah.
Explaining his resignation. There's nothing that he's explained. And, who knows why? Could this have been personal? Could this have been like, I'm not willing to put Syria through this again? Could this, be because he miscalculated? Some people who were very close to the president, again, not Syrian, talked about, real insiders talked about Assad having miscalculated by constantly rebuffing Turkey's efforts to sit and, work out a solution for the north, because Erdogan ultimately wanted there to be no Kurds who could attack Turkish interests in the north. And Assad was not willing to fight Syrian Kurds with Turkey. Okay, it's so ironic. It's this group of secessionist Kurds who basically sided with the Americans, and were using American arms to steal Syrian resources. But Assad did not want to fight with a foreign country against Syrians. Okay, so this was a big miscalculation. The Turks changed their tune a lot when they're sitting in front of the Iranians and the Russians, and potentially a deal could have been hammered out that would have been beneficial. But Assad refused to fight the Kurds in that way. And he also had that, that absolute red line, like, you have to withdraw from Syrian territory before I will sit down with you. And that may not have been the smartest move. But, historians will go back and say what he could have done, what he should have done, et cetera, et cetera. But I almost think, I think it was important to say that Assad did not request the assistance, the military assistance of any of his allies. It was offered repeatedly, and he said no. And from what I understand, until the last few days, he kept flipping. So it wasn't like absolute. He wasn't sure, and then he decided to leave. So it bears saying that, and then moving on to an examination of the situation. But let's hear your thoughts about that. Even,
what do you think, Karim?
I think we are living in an end of an era. As Shamini said, the fronts, especially Syria, collapsed, and Syria was like the most important link, because it was playing the role of logistics and arming everybody, and many people that were aiming to fight Israel trained there, and they had the political cover and the funds. So it's another fun era, and currently we're seeing that the people that Bashar already won and they were stronger now are taking over Syria. And of course we should not ignore what Israel did and what
Yes.
Israel is doing now. They are still bombing till now Syrian infrastructure. They don't want a country there or a government.
Mm.
That means that Syria might be a new Afghanistan on West Asia. Sorry, in West Asia. I don't know because currently, as Sharmin said, the Kurds are backed by the United States and Al Julani is backed by Turkey, and there's a conflict in interests. And Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they don't like Turkey. They prefer to take Syria for themselves, and the oil and the resources of Syria is still under control of the
Of the
Kurds.
Kurds. Mhm.
And we still have bases in Al Tanaf near the Jordan-Syrian border, and we still have like 4 or 5 bases in Syria for the Americans. Will the Americans retreat and the Kurds will fall as the government of Bashar al-Assad fall? We still have to see, and of course we have to talk about the region, about the people of the region. We saw many videos. People are like really angry at Assad, as Sharmi said, because he didn't say anything. He left them as they are, and
Mm.
he didn't explain anything. That's one. And of course, there's many people that even they had their kids. They urged their kids to fight and defend Syria because Syria holds a cause, and now they are very angry. And of course, there's people are cheering that were against Assad, and even there's Palestinians cheering against Assad.
I mean,
Not at all, but we have to know also to tell the same people that the gangs that are now taking Syria is not a good story. What happened is not a good scenario for whole of West Asia. What happened is not that like the people came into the streets and there was a protest and Assad resigned. No, there's armed groups that are linked with Daesh, ISIS, and like extremists from all over the world, from Shishan, from even China, from the UK. They are among
Mm.
them, and these people can't stop. Yeah, they are born to fight. They want the aim for them to make a new Islamic State, not like the Iranian Islamic State, like ISIS Islamic State. So we have to wait and see what will happen, and we have to see
Mm.
what about the Caesar Act, and will be like
Yeah.
commercial flights? Will there be port? What's the stance of Russia? They have like the largest military base outside their borders, and there's many things still hanging. And of course, Hezbollah now in Lebanon, we will have a new president. They will elect a new president, and in Lebanon, the deputies in the parliament, they are the guys who pick the president. So we'll see how this will work in Lebanon. Who will come a president? And of course, there's like we have to see what will happen in Iraq because we know Hajj al-Shabi, the whole thought of the shadow, the idea of the shadow, and maybe in a bigger war, they will cross over Syria and help Hezbollah or whatever. But now this will never happen. We know Al Julani and the Hayat Tahrir Sham, HTS, after 14 months of the war in Gaza, till now they didn't say anything. They don't have a statement to support the Palestinian people. They are ignore and voicing the word Israel. And I know many people think that these people will do anything for Palestine, but unfortunately they won't. So we'll see what will happen. Until now, Israel is benefiting, and the bigger winner till now of what happened is Erdogan. We can say Erdogan gangs entered the Damascus, and we still have to see what the Americans will do. They will stand with the Kurds till the end, or no, khalas, they will give it to Erdogan, because unfortunately these are the powers that will dictate what will happen.
so for now, let's focus because you're completely correct, Karin. The angles to this are almost interminable. We could be here for hours discussing every single angle. But I think let's get into the what I disagree with you because I think the biggest winner of the weekend is Benjamin Netanyahu. He is literally doing a champion's run around the Golan Heights. You know, he came to give a speech to declare himself the person behind, you know, the fall of Assad. He claimed responsibility for it. He's like, thumping his chest. Now we have Israeli troops just hours after HTS takes Damascus, their tanks start rolling into the occupied Golan Heights. They have taken Mount Hermon. They have entered the town of Kunatria. It is de facto annexation, right? And you, at the other hand, you have all of these Sunni extremist groups who are essentially silent, as you said, right? They haven't even said. I think Julani gave one statement in which he said that what's happening in the south is an occupation, that Israel is actually occupying those lands. I think that's as far as he has gone. Because remember in the little video that he released, in which he's like standing like a postmodern rapper in this, in this background of fog, looking at a phone. He doesn't even mention Israel when he talks about the war. He says that the war that Iran has caused in the region, right? Everything's redirected to Iran. So now Israel has the Golan Heights. What else are they going to go after now? We know they've been bombing Syria for the past day and a half more than 200 times. They claim to have hit 100 targets. They are destroying Syria's air defenses. They're destroying their weapon depots. They claim they're destroying these chemical weapon labs, etc. Right? They're essentially cutting Syria off at the knees. Israel has declared that now they are in a state of war against Syria. But the question is, war against whom exactly? Right? Because the other side doesn't seem very interested in fighting Israel at all.
Well, listen, all these countries are being opportunistic. I honestly don't think that when Turkey ordered this operation, and by the way, Turkey is at a loss here. It can't claim victory because it kept denying that it had anything to do with this operation.
Yeah.
Whereas the Americans and Israelis have grabbed onto it and said, we helped this happen. Everyone's being opportunistic. Don't think this actually means what it means. Turkey did this, and I think neither Turkey nor the Israelis nor the Americans anticipated this result. The idea for Erdogan was to have an operation that went beyond Idlib, went into Aleppo, which would pressure Bashar al-Assad to do the deal that he wanted, that Erdogan wanted before. Okay. Yeah. And he sensed this was a vulnerability because a ceasefire had, been established in Lebanon, and one was being talked about Gaza, and the perception that the axis had been weakened. I don't think anyone expected this to go to where it did. I mean, I believe the Israelis had Syria in their sights for the next their next hit, because as I said in the last podcast, if Israel is not kinetic, it loses, right? I mean, Israel, yes. Netanyahu's not kinetic, he loses. Okay. So he will keep going until someone stops him, because at the end of a cessation of all hostilities, he then has to face the domestic situations that he has created from October 7th, from his corruption cases, the litigation, the ICC arrest warrant. All those things suddenly become very real. As long as he keeps being kinetic and launching wars or strikes, he gets to maintain this, I'm Israel's big savior, and, watch me go. So, of course, he's going to claim this victory in Syria.
Yeah.
Though I don't think they anticipated this. They did anticipate going to the south, but in this case, they knew they could just roll right in. And of course,
it feels like that he can claim that he fulfilled his promise to create a new Middle East.
Yeah, but it's still early days, like you guys were talking about. Like I have to say, and it's not. So we could talk about this for a long time, because if we break into his achievements in Lebanon, he did not achieve his war goals in Lebanon.
No.
Okay, what he showed was that the Lebanese resistance can be deterred if you kill enough Lebanese civilians. That's all he achieved in Lebanon. He's now gone 14 kilometers inside Syria. He couldn't do half of that in 2 months of fighting in Lebanon. So let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I've said before, for every action, there's a reaction. Even the winners in any scenarios, they never quite get what they want, because there is always another side, if it's efficient, capable, has resources, etc., will be trying to micromanage a situation to get some benefit out of it. So where things fall are by no means certain. They may not be certain in months or even years yet. Because as you said, Karim, I mean, there are 37 groups, 37 militant groups that participated in this operation. I remember being in the south of Syria before the Southern Liberation Operation, when Daraa was still occupied by militants, okay? There were 52 groups there. Okay, of course, HTS, even then, Al-Qaeda was the strongest fighting force in Daraa. They fell in 2 seconds. These guys, as we've seen even in Idlib and other areas they've taken, they can't agree with each other. You can see that, Jolani came in saying, we're going to bring order. And of course, there was no order. I mean, the looting has gone wild. It's not just civilian looting. We've seen a lot of armed people looting, right? So he hasn't been able to fulfill that initial promise. It is something that I think the Turks, the Russians, the Astana crowd, wanted to show that these people are capable of leadership, and they've been felled at the first hurdle on this. But we might see a lot more calm come in the weeks and months to come. We will see. But everything is fluid right now, extremely fluid. And there are spoilers everywhere. I'm not even talking about our side. The new Middle East would be one in which the axis of resistance had nothing left that they could do. I would argue that Iran has lost, because everyone's looking at Iran, Iran has lost strategic depth in Syria. It still has it with Iraq. And where it lost the last West Asian Arab state that was foundationally anti-Zionist, right? It actually, in a way, gained one in Yemen, which seems to have much more flexibility in doing what it wants than the Syrians had, certainly what we've seen in the last 14 months. So it's really too early to write an obituary on these things. The Israelis will have many ploys, and they are, like I said, very kinetic. They're not missing a beat. They're not missing an opportunity. The axis of resistance in 14 months has missed a lot of opportunities. But will this create will the fall of Syria create a real reason for them to revamp their thinking fundamentally, whether it means creating a nuclear bomb, whether it means taking the fight into another sphere? We've yet to see many of these things.
What do you think is next for the axis of resistance, Karim?
Yeah, I just wanted to also touch a topic that's very important also. We have to acknowledge that the losses that Hezbollah took and the weakening of Hezbollah also led to this fast fall of the Syrian government, because many fighters from Hezbollah were there and they were defending the Syrian government. And of course, when these groups saw that Hezbollah has been weakened, they attacked, and they gained a lot of land, and especially in Aleppo. And maybe there's a deal, or the Russians or whatever told Bashar al-Assad, these guys are coming, there's no Hezbollah, do you want to this war again, do you want to fight again? And that also contributed to the fall of the Syrian government. The fighters of Hezbollah were not as strong as before. That's one. And also, as Sharmin said, the Iranians asked Bashar if he wants any help, and he didn't want any help. And also, you mentioned that Netanyahu said that this is the new Middle East. I think if this was the new Middle East, or Israel, is confident of what happened in Syria, they won't be bombing the infrastructure of Syria. They would put a puppet state, as in Egypt and Jordan and other places, and they will let them fulfill what they want. But what happens?
Correct. They still don't have control of the situation in Syria.
Yeah.
That's what it shows.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's no control. We have to wait and see what will happen, as Sharmin said. And especially that there's many groups, and these groups are extremists, and they won't all fall under one man. It's really impossible. They have ideological different mentalities and thoughts, and they were all fed from different places. Some are fed like the Islam of Qatar, some are fed the Islam of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, some are think like Taliban used to think, and Al-Qaeda, and they have different thoughts, and they are raised in different ideologies. And these people usually don't agree on one thing: they can't rule. It's a fact. They can't rule. So we have to wait and see what will happen.
But that's, because Western media keeps telling us that HTS is diversity friendly, that, these are reform jihadists who are going to allow anyone to be part of government, right? The US and the UK are now both saying that they're considering removing the terrorist designation for al-Julani, for HTS, lifting the $10 million bounty that they have on his head, So I don't know, Karim.
So that's a point of discussion. That's not necessarily going to happen. The reason I say that is because it depends on how these militant groups act, right? If they're impeccable in their behavior and they really go by sort of rule of law, etc., then the Americans and the British will have an argument. They already have contact with these people for sure, because they're the drivers of the Al-Qaeda extremism that entered Syria from 2011, 100%. But, in terms of public face, they can't really rehabilitate someone who they have on a wanted poster for so long. It would be akin to, just think about when David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, ran for office. And I think he was in Louisiana, House of Representatives. Okay, he was an elected official. Even that couldn't resuscitate his affiliation to the Ku Klux Klan. But you're going to whitewash the image of the leader of Al-Qaeda, the guy who was part of ISIS. It's not like 20, 30 years ago, which was David Duke's case. It's literally in the last decade. You can find statements by Jolani saying all the wrong things not too long ago. And of course, they've trimmed his beard and stuff. The Cradle actually last week commissioned a piece on Jolani. I can't wait to see it. It's going to be by our intrepid investigative journalist, William Van Wagenen. And so I know it's going to be good. And what his story is, but I think it's going to be very hard. He may be kingmaker behind the throne. They will decide whether or not in the end Jolani suits. But I want to go back to something really quickly. It may be a bit boring, but I think it's important because we have some alleged deal points from the Astana meeting in Doha. I suspect that these deal points are not much different than the deal points that were under discussion consistently by the Turks, the Syrians, and the Turks, the Russians, and the Iranians during multiple rounds of Astana. But here are the deal points as Saturday was taking place, right? They met it on Saturday, and Assad left later that night.
Yes.
Essentially. So the proposed solution for Syria, and the reason we should be looking at this is maybe because this is the basis of how all parties could stomach a transition, meaning from the Gulf Arab countries to the Iranians, to the Turks, to the Russians, even the Americans, start implementing UN Resolution 2254, which was, the international basis for change in Syria. Form a national unity government under the supervision of a team from the UN and the Arab League within a month, not including the Turks, incidentally, okay? So, they thought Arab voices would be more important in shaping what comes next in Syria. Bashar al-Assad remains president for 6 to 9 months and gives a large part of his authorities to agreed upon prime minister who must be independent. So this was envisioned with Assad still there. And he changed his mind that night. A new constitution for the country written by a new committee, a third of which is appointed by the United Nations, a third by Damascus, and a third by the Syrian coalition. I have no problem with the last two. But why would the United Nations have any part in determining the constitution of a country? It has to be by Syrians, even if they're extremists. Do you know what I mean? It has to be a Syrian initiative. And I do want to come back to that because the Syrian constitution argument is very interesting. If you read it, I sent it to you guys a few days ago. I don't know what they're going to change, but actually there are a few things. And if they change those, we might very early on see where they're heading. Point 5, Russia, Iran, and Turkey monitor the ceasefire, which suggests to me that they still thought Assad staying was an option. All three of them. which is why I don't think Turkey anticipated their operation to have such a resounding effect, okay? And that it was just Assad deciding to leave that had these guys in Damascus, okay? All forces withdraw to their bases and joint police units continue to protect the cities. All foreign forces withdraw from the country by the end of 2025, which was one of Assad's goals, right? With as far as the Turkish went. So that was an essential. So these are the points, and these ultimately could still be the leading points for the international community, including the main stakeholders in Syria, meaning the official stakeholders in Syria, which was approved by the previous Syrian government, the Turks and the Russians. Now, the Russian situation is very up in the air. The Russians have said, we don't know if we're going to stay in Syria or not, and that depends on what happens next, and they're right to say that, okay? But on the other hand, let's point out that Turkey very much benefits from a Russian president presence in many ways, because the Russians have shown themselves very amenable to arriving at solutions, to finding solutions, okay? Which the Americans never are. They manage solutions, but they never offer solutions, right? So demilitarization of Syria happened with Russian help, and the Russians are in touch with all elements, including the Syrian opposition, the militant groups, as well as Turkey, as well as Iran. But interestingly now, in this multipolar world, the UAE, the Saudis, these people have no problem with the Russians being there. In fact, that's what they wanted for a really long time, for the Iranians to be out and for the Russians to take the lead, because Russia is a partner that everyone can deal with, has open doors to all parties in the region, and is solutions focused. So I think it would be a big loss for the Turks if the Russians just stepped out. But the Americans would want the Russians to step out, in which case their elements in the militancy and Israel's elements in the militancy might do all to get the Russians out. But yeah, okay, so this is a big question. I mean, will the Russians stay or go? Will also, I think, make a big difference to what happens in Syria, because they're a party that is able to bring order. Interestingly enough, so have the Turks, okay, because they can pull in these groups. Though now these guys have tasted the power of Damascus, and standing at the podium of the Umayyad Mosque, right? They may have their own ideas. So I think the Turks run the risk of Syria suddenly becoming their biggest burden in a whole different way than they anticipated. If you want to look at it as a burden, it was it was a resistance axis burden, a Russian burden in the past. But now, at least then, the Syrian government, one party could make a decision, it could be implemented nationwide, or, where they had territorial control. But now, can Turkey do that? Can Turkey influence elements? And also, let's consider that all these parties, all the Arab states, okay, every party in this region has said Syria's territorial integrity must remain whole. The only two players who absolutely have no problem with that not coming to fruition are the Americans and the Israelis, because as we know, they like fractured states.
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what Erdogan, I think, is thinking about, because if you made he wanted to do a limited operation to pressure Assad or whatever, but now, still, there is no Syria, there is no government. Who will recognize this government? Who will be there? Till now, of course, all the pressure and all the heavyweights Erdogan should carry, because these people believe in Erdogan, and they love Turkey, and they feel that Turkey is their big brother. But can Turkey provide, for instance, money for all of these people? Can they govern Syria? Can they provide them free of transportation? Because I think it's very difficult currently to have a Syrian passport that you can travel to and from, and we have to see the port. Yeah, and there's many things, and it might take maybe it will be very fast, what happened might take in 1 month, and might take years.
I think, the most important element at play at this time is really, are they going to get along, these groups, right? These dozens of groups. And I mean, they have been opening up the prisons, right? They just open up all the prisons in Syria, let everyone out. And while there are obviously political prisoners, and there are obviously, like Palestinian and Lebanese who have been detained for wrongful reasons, and Syrians as well, you're also talking about ISIS fighters, and you're also talking about terrorists, not just, from Syria, but from who knows where else. This was,
Criminals,
the
modern criminals.
exactly, or just criminals for that matter. And to that point, to the point of, can they get along? We're starting to see already, just as we started recording this episode, the SNA, right, the Syrian National Army, for the former Free Syrian Army backed by Turkey, took control of the town of Manjib from the SDF, from the US-backed Kurds. They attacked them yesterday. They apparently killed about 20 SDF soldiers using Turkish drones, and now they're taking control of that town, right? So you wouldn't consider this infighting, but it is fighting amongst the multiple factions deployed in Syria. So for now, it would be the Kurds, right? But tomorrow, for all we know, is going to be a war between, those who are in control in Aleppo and those who are remaining in Idlib, or the ones who are, in Deraa. Who knows how they're going to start killing each other? During the first days of the offensive, there were already casualties between HTS and SNA commanders who just started killing each other because there were old grudges, right? So, but one thing I do want to ask you guys, and I think it's very important, and sometimes it feels like it's falling through the cracks a bit. At this point, after what happened in Syria, Palestine has become completely isolated, right? Lebanon as well. But the Palestinian resistance more so, given the calamity that they have faced over the past year. Nonetheless, you have Hamas and you have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad this morning congratulating the developments in Syria, right? Congratulating the Syrian people and saying they look forward to the system that is coming. A very political statement they both released. I am still a bit of an outsider to this region, right? And when these things happen, it's when I feel it the most, right? When I really just cannot wrap my head around these things, because now, as I said, to me, the biggest winner of this weekend is Netanyahu. And Israel has, if they didn't have carte blanche before, they definitely have carte blanche now to finish everything they were looking to do in Gaza and to now move as strongly as they want into the West Bank and obviously into Syria, where they were already taking control of the Golan Heights and beyond.
Look, the Palestinians aren't wrong to say this. I mean, even I think the Iranians. I mean, nobody is opposed to a different system of government. I mean, we saw a post by Bashar al-Jafari, the Syrian ambassador to Moscow and the former longtime Syrian ambassador to the United Nations during the Syrian war, who, I think reflected the sentiments of many Syrians who were for a unified Syria under one strong government based in Damascus, and basically against a foreign intervention, foreign regime change in Syria, who expressed frustration with, I think, the president and the way he left, and also was hoping that good things would come out of this. I mean, I think all good people and all good Syrians want this to be a successful operation. This would be a new era in Syria, and it's not necessarily going to be a bad one. I think the way it's come about, this change wasn't earned. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't earned. It wasn't a people's thing. It was 37 militant groups from Idlib that races the country unopposed, with the head of state deciding to leave. It's not an actual Syrian thing. And I think that's going to show up in many, many ways during what's coming. Now, the Palestinians are right. I think even the Iranians wish the Syrians a happy journey, a safe and a stable and secure journey to a better future. The Palestinian factions did reiterate, we hope we continue, Palestine continues to be at the heart of Syrians. And, because Syria was obviously the last state in the Arab world that still helped train the Palestine Liberation Army. It was the last foothold for Palestinian factions in their liberation struggle. So, of course, they express those sentiments. I mean, nobody wishes anything other than success in what's coming next for Syria, but there's a whole lot of spoilers. Now, just back to my reading through the deal points from Doha. One of the deal points was a new Syrian constitution. That's been on the table for so long. I decided to actually go and look at the Syrian constitution again and see what really needs to be changed about this, because the Syrian constitution was changed in 2012, I think early 2012, and there was a public referendum on the acceptance of the constitution. You didn't have the Arab League and a coalition of people and the United Nations deciding the Syrian constitution. In the end, there was a vote, right? But the preamble to the constitution is absolutely straight up in paragraph 4 mentions the Zionist enemy, okay? And in any changes to the Constitution, that will be the first thing I will be looking at. Okay, now HTS will want to gather support from the Arab masses, and the quickest way to do that is on the Palestine issue. Simply that. I think everyone wants the new Syrian state to be, at least on Palestine, stand in the same way as the old Syrian state. But these guys don't care. The HTS and TO don't care. We've seen that. Al-Qaeda and, we're being tended to in Israeli hospitals during the Syrian war. So that is a major change to watch for. Most of the Constitution reads really well. Like, I don't think anyone from any country would see this as a bad thing. I think even Islam is mentioned as the official religion of the state, etc. Let's see if they add a whole lot of more paragraphs to that. If they do a new one, the president has to have been residing in Syria for the last 10 years consecutively. That may be a problem. And the president's wife must be Syrian. So no Chechens and no Uyghurs and no, whatever. So there's a few things I'm thinking of, like, those things are changed because the Constitution reads well. Among the Constitution's elements, strong and in great part, are the duty of an obligation of the Syrian state to provide social networks and social services for its people. Like, it's a good Constitution. So I think we're going to have to be watching out for that language very, very carefully. So there are many ways to watch for things slowly shifting here. But in terms of what's happening on the ground, so I was talking to a Syrian friend today who was recounting stories of his Syrian friends in Syria and saying, like, in Aleppo, they truly did leave the Christians alone. This is part of their charm offensive, right? But they were like bullying about leaving the Christians alone. They would go to their door and bang on it and say, let us in, let us in. And they're like, why do you need to come in? We want to let you know we're friendly. Let us in, let us in. That kind of slight terrorizing people, or even, in Aleppo, Syria is a secular country. And so Muslim women don't wear Islamic traditional clothing necessarily. So they're asking a lot of people, like a lot of women, are you Christian? And if they say no, they're like, well, why aren't you in hijab? So we hear a lot of things like this. Charm offensive is going on, but it's just a face, because you can see that they want to see a different Syria. They visually want to see an extremely Islamist Syria, and that's already happened in the last 11 days. So what more are we going to see now that they sort of rule the roost in Damascus?
Now we have to see how many days or maybe weeks they will stay under the same command, because currently they are staying under the same command, but I don't think they will. The situation will remain like this. And regarding Esteban's question, I think Netanyahu's speech like 2 days ago, I think he hinted that he's willing to stop the war in Gaza. And I think what happened in Syria and following the war with Hezbollah, I don't think he will continue. They will make a deal, especially that that Trump is coming, and he can comfortably now say to his allies and to his opposition that Israel gained many things in this war, and unfortunately, he can say that they won the war, and he can stop it and make a deal regarding the prisoners. Just wanted to say something when this happened, because I was a believer, to be honest. To anybody who fight or has any vision against Israel, and this thing shattered 2 days ago. And I was talking to a friend. She told me that every generation has their own Nakba, as we say in Arabic. In the 40s we had a Nakba, in the 60s, and in the 80s, and this is another Nakba for the for Arabs and any supporters for Israel. But I think the fight will continue. And we are insignificant in this world, and it's like a big, heavy battle. And we will see the shape of the next battle. Yani. Who can say that Egypt was willing to fight for Palestine, but now they are not? And who was thinking that the Shah of Iran in the 70s will fight against Israel, but now Iran is fighting against Israel. So time passes on, many things happen. And of course, who will think that Julani will be in Damascus? So
yeah, again, I want to warn against too much downgrading, too much of like this was an utter loss type of scenario. This has been a devastating ride for the resistance axis, no question about it. And I think that was not pronounced until yesterday with Assad leaving. Truly, genuinely, there's like a whole different feeling now. No question about it. But it wasn't caused by the Israelis. Let them take credit for it and spin this narrative, but you have to look at the components one by one. And like I said last time, in 14 months, I mean, just yesterday, 8 Israeli soldiers killed. Today, 4 Israeli soldiers killed. The Israelis have not been able to stop the threat from non-state actors on 2 of their borders. Okay? So for the Israelis, if everything just, the resistance just stopped fighting, okay, the threat has not gone. There is no more strategic depth today for the Israelis than there was yesterday, except this 14 kilometers into Syria. And they're going to keep it and, dance about it until the Syrians and the international community decide to direct their attention to Israel on that border, because of course they will. Of course they will eventually. All right. It's just not now because there's too many other considerations. So Israel didn't, that was an easy one. You and I could have walked in and taken 14 kilometers, of Syria yesterday, right? That's not a win in the same way. Hezbollah remains absolutely intact and able to do exactly what it has done in the last 2 months. Okay. Now, don't forget this. Assad not asking Iran and Hezbollah to intervene militarily goes back a little while. It's not like, I'm not even talking about months, but like a few years, because as he was ingratiating himself with the Emiratis and the Saudis and trying to get back into the Arab fold, their main demand was, Iran out. Iran didn't need to be there. It was not like a loss for Iran. They didn't need to physically be there because he was working out another solution for himself. And what's good for Syria is good for them, right? And but actually, in the interim, there are other ways. There were also routes that were stopped by the Assad government for the transportation of weapons, because he didn't want Syria to be consistently bombed by the Israelis either, right? It's not like the Iran-Hezbollah connection, the arms transfers, the be-all and end-all was in Syria. That was the case before, but that has been morphing into other solutions for the last few years anyways, okay? Iran is still intact. Iran has won some ground in showing for the first time that Iran, the thing that Iran's just playing like it's against Israel, that narrative in the Arab world that it's just using the Palestinian cause, it'll never step up Iran did twice already. And as far as we know, Operation True Promise is still not off the table. Let's see what happens to that. If there's an absolute shit show of jihadis, right, running havoc through Syria, we might see this. And the Israelis benefiting more and more for this. We might see this. I don't know. I'm not saying that anymore. But Iran retains some deterrence, certainly. I think Hezbollah lost some deterrence because it showed that if you kill enough civilians, Hezbollah will fold. Simply that. Maybe they're the most moral army in the region. But Yemen has come into play. So there's a new element of this axis. I think the Israelis want to calm down the Lebanese front, want to stop the Gaza front, but for other aims. They will smell an opportunity for Iraq's weakness and vulnerability and Jordan's weakness and vulnerability in the next scenario, the next phase, I think. What are they, ultimately, unless Netanyahu's coalition comes down, his coalition wants to take territory, Gaza and the West Bank, and they need to remove millions of Palestinians somewhere else. And of course, their solution has ultimately always been Jordan. Egypt has said a hard no, right? Jordan is the most malleable and weakest link. So Jordan is in a quandary. And Iraq, I think, because Iraq has weak decision-making, centralized decision-making ability, very, very weak, that might be another target. And that would be critical to Iran's strategic depth. That is where they start poking at Iran, because Netanyahu said, I'm turning my attention to Iran. So if you look at what he really needs, not having resolved his Lebanon problem and his Gaza problem, okay, just putting them on ceasefire and hold, what he needs is a place to remove Palestinians to, A, Jordan, right, big settler project, and B, going after Iran, weaken their Iraqi ally, and then Iran doesn't have strategic depth. So I think that's how he's going to go. I do think the Israelis are going to continue. I know Trump has said no wars, but he meant no hot war as on your borders. That doesn't stop Israel from attacking every single country in the axis as it likes for the foreseeable future, because that's not a war. Those are just strikes, So Iran's going to have to wake up to that possibility that Israel is going to test, like the MAD theory about Israel, right?
Yes.
Just test, train people to accept more bad behavior. We will see a lot of this, and Iran is going to be on the receiving end of much of it, as I believe is Yemen, as I believe is Iraq.
So I want to know, especially about Hezbollah, because I feel like at this point they've been isolated, or for the foreseeable future with this change in Syria. Then you have the Iraqi resistance, right, that amassed at the Syrian border, but then obviously got direct orders from above to say do not cross. And Syrian army members have been flooding into Iraq now. Yemen this morning, you had a drone attack. They launched another drone attack in not Tel Aviv, I'm sorry, in central Israel. It hit a penthouse. They say was a sensitive target. So obviously these operations, at least from Yemen, are continuing. Nevertheless, we have been hearing that the UAE and Israel is setting up, they're propping up this separatist regime in Somalia, right, in Somaliland, which is off the coast of Yemen, to carry attacks inside Yemen. So obviously their project against the axis of resistance is not done yet. But they do feel very confident at this point. And I don't know, Karim, I feel like you are very, you know a lot in particular about Yemen and Iraq. What do you think that is next for them, right? And can we expect something similar to what we saw in Syria for Yemen?
And at this point, I think so. I think they will try harder on Yemen, as Sharwin said, on Iraq, and to eventually reach Iran. But I don't know if they will succeed in Yemen. Yemen is different than Syria. They don't have like this internal political issues. And they have they have the military capability.
And they also employ some mad strategy themselves, which is interesting, because the other parts of the axis does not. at all.
Yeah,
Sure.
100%. And I often ask myself why Assad didn't retaliate since like 12 years. Israel is mobbing fr- uh, from uh, from time to time, but apparently he was unable to retaliate. And the Syrian army and the Syrian government was so weak, weaker than we ever imagined. That's why this happened. But Yemenis till now know they have strong government. And don't forget something, which is, I think, the number one. It is the economy. And
For
for the
Yemen.
Syrians, said to themselves,
Oh, yeah.
why fight? The Syrian soldier salary is like $20. Uh, they did benefit economically from what happened, and this plays a big role. While in Yemen, what's different is that where Ansar Allah are, the economy is better and the exchange rate is better than other areas. So this is a very very يعني important point for me. And in the Arab world, usually normal people or the families prefer to go to places where the economy is better. And in Yemen, Ansarullah areas is better. Unlike what happened in Syria, because here in Lebanon there are also many Syrians because of this. And many people ask me, "What do you think?" And we have like nobody knows how much, but at least quarter of the Lebanese people that resides in Lebanon are Syrians. So people ask, will they return? My answer was, unless the economy in Syria is better than Lebanon or at least equal, why they return if you got paid here more? So I think this is a very good point for Ansarullah. And I don't think nowadays, as Shameen said, that they have much strategy. I don't think Saudi Arabia or UAE want to see their capitals or their famous buildings being hit or targeted, because Ansarullah will target them.
Yeah. It's
And
I
of
feel
course,
like it,
just not to forget that the U.S. Navy tried and they made coalitions. The European tried,
and it
and it
failed
was a big
miserably.
war. So we have to wait and see. But of course, they will try to weaken them economically, and maybe after that, decade or two or whatever, or when their
That's what I was
opposition.
going to ask you actually, because it feels like maybe what we are looking at is more sanctions against Yemen, right? Like a ceasefire act for Yemen. Now we know that because there's even this is also something interesting that I've seen recently about the ceasefire act, that U.S. lawmakers are discussing extending it again. This is the sanctions, the very wide sanctions imposed on Syria about 6 or so years ago, and we know that the United States loves to use their own currency as their biggest weapon of mass destruction against.
I think they'll continue, by the way, to use it on Syria until they get a government that follows their orders. To be honest, if I were the Americans, that's what I would do. Just like a new update, this is from Al Jazeera's correspondent, Al Jazeera. Let's not forget this. That Mohammed al-Bashir, who was head of the Syrian Salvation Government, which is the government running Idlib, the stronghold of Al-Qaeda in Syria and all the extremist groups. He is now expected to be announced as, the Syrian prime minister to oversee the transitional process. Okay. He will... He is, interestingly, he's apparently an electronic engineer from the University of Aleppo in 2007, and then got a degree in Sharia and law from Idlib University in 2021. So we can immediately see that the people in charge of heading up the transitional body are absolutely part of that extremist line. Okay. Very interestingly, Al Jazeera says this came after a meeting to determine arrangements for the transfer of power and avoid Syria entering a state of chaos, which took place between the commander in the Armed Opposition Operations Management, Ahmed al-Shara, and al-Bashir, this new guy, and the former government's prime minister, I think, who was tasked with running the government's affairs. Now, Al Jazeera calls Abu Muhammad al-Jolani in this Ahmed al-Shara. which is his real name. Absolutely, from the get-go, rehabilitation of an extremely wanted Al-Qaeda and ISIS-related figure, okay, that the UN has designated as a terrorist group, and he has been the head of that. So what do you make of that, Esteban? I know you have a lot to say on the subject.
No, I've just been still a bit in shock, and I shouldn't be, by the media blitz that has followed Jolani. This man is getting this is the Zelenskification of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the former deputy of the founder of ISIS, right? We saw him give a televised interview, prime time, to CNN,
Yeah.
a sit-down interview in which, when he gets asked, what about your past? What about your past in Al-Qaeda and in ISIS? His answer is, well, I was young. I was a young man. So what you do as a young man, I guess it changes with age. When you chop someone's head off, when you persecute some religious minorities, well, that's because I was a young man. This is his answer, and this is how he's getting whitewashed. You see the CNN interviewer, wearing the hijab, and then you can't help but think a couple of years ago when Christiana Manpour, CNN did this whole this big what's the word I'm
Theater.
looking for? Yeah, this big theater about Ibrahim Raisi, the former president of Iran, refusing to sit down with Christiana Manpour because she wasn't wearing a hijab. But for Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, former deputy commander of ISIS and Al-Qaeda,
No, and what did CNN's Christiana Manpour do at the time? She actually sat in the interview room alone without a hijab to make a point. And they aired that shit. Do you know? And now, of course, the situation's completely changed. I don't know how, if they couldn't resuscitate David Duke's, past, when he was a young man, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, how they're going to do with a guy who is with, Al-Qaeda was the entire basis for the 20-plus year U.S. war on terror.
Exactly.
There are people in the U.S. intelligence establishment who want to shoot themselves. Like, what was the point of all of this?
Exactly. For 2 decades, Al-Qaeda was synonymous with 9/11, right? With the attacks on New York City. Now Jolani he's getting a profile in Rolling Stone. He's getting interviews left and right to Israeli media, right? Like exclusive interviews. Not just him, but other commanders in this extremist conglomeration that has formed
and
in
we
Syria.
should notice his beard's been neatened up, and we should notice he's wearing Zelensky hockey.
The green.
It's just, if it worked for a while there, why not here?
It's I think we've reached new depths. I think we've reached new depths, and to what Western media is willing to do, Gulf-backed media as well, just doing this whitewash job of a terrorist, right? I think at the Cradle we very rarely use the word terrorist, but in this case you cannot avoid it. You cannot avoid it. You're talking about a terrorist, a wanted terrorist with a $10 million bounty on his head to this day, the day that we are recording this podcast. But he's getting the Zelensky treatment. He's getting, the savior. He's the savior of Syria.
But there's going to be pushback on that narrative. That's the thing. Like, the Americans and the British can just try, and the Israelis can just try. But every time you catch any one of these 37 militant groups doing something horrendous, you then have them having to backtrack. So, and it's the Chinese and Russians are very big on anti-terrorism, very big on this. So the pushback is going to be on the global stage as well. And so, Syria is in for a few years of a tug of war. Internally, externally, regionally, So
I think the China angle, because the Turkestan Islamic Party, I hope I'm not getting that wrong, is a big part of this advance in Syria, and this is a proscribed organization in China, a Uyghur terror organization. And so, like we said at the beginning, we could sit here for hours, discuss every angle, and this is something obviously we're going to stay on because it's a new day in many ways, right? The fall of Syria, I don't think we can say it any other way. It marks a new day for absolutely every single player in the region. But for now, we are going to wrap this episode up. We want to thank everyone for joining us and to remind you to please share, to leave a like, to share this video, to drop a comment, and to please follow us on Telegram, on X, on Instagram, and to check out our Patreon, where again you can support the work that we do at such an uncertain time. We thank you very much for all of those who are already Patreon subscribers, and we ask the rest to at least check it out. So for the Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmin Narwan.